All right, my name is Austin, senior product designer here at GitLab, now working for the Foundations group. This presentation today is maybe more of a cautionary tale. So as we think about the future of where GitLab is moving towards, one of our direction items is we want to grow our level of contributions to 1,000 per month. And are you ready for that as a designer? Because I think I learned this milestone that I am not ready just yet, and I have a lot of things to improve upon. So I'm going to use a specific example from a contribution that came from our GHU team as they were trying to basically extend the work of the compliance group in 14.9. So this all kind of originated when I think a product manager from GHU was like, hey, I see you have this epic here. I like what you're doing. We could really use this. Can we start building on it? I'll be honest, at this point in time, our product manager was on paternity leave and I was doing some of the backlog refinement, and it wasn't like the cleanest thing. But I think what I've really learned through this process is we operate a lot on unspoken levels of trust and communication around how we execute work. And that definitely appears in this thread. So she was like, hey, we want to come help. And Sam White and I both were trying to be like, yeah, we definitely want you to come help. Here's like some of the issues we can direct you towards to get you started. And they're like, great, we're going to put this on like the 14.9 milestone planning. We're like, cool, super stoked to have this contribution because this was like a big item on one of our roadmap pieces, but we just haven't had time as a group to get around to it. So then this is kind of where my hubris comes in, because I thought I had crafted a great issue that was ready to be built on. I'm going to blame the accepting merge request label on the GitLab bot that just threw that on there when I wasn't looking, and I just never went back to update it. So what I was essentially trying to do was communicate, hey, in this next iteration, we want to build upon our MVC that we created, which was purely all backend. It was just an API beta test essentially to see if there was any interest with our customers or users that would potentially want to send their audit event data outside of GitLab. The signal was we got a lot of great feedback from some of our existing customers about being excited, like, yay, GitLab's finally letting me do this. And so what we thought was the reasonable next step was, let's build it in the UI, because if you can do it in the API, why can't you do it in our UI? So me thinking, let's make this as simple as possible from the engineering side. Let me do a little sleuthing in our code base here and see if I can find a component in our Vue library that would maybe be able to be reappropriated for a similar use case. And what I had come across was the related issuable input, which I assumed was a shared Vue component that could be reused elsewhere. So everything in my designs here were kind of predicated around using that. And where you normally see that component show up is in issues. You have the related issues, and essentially it's a small form that you paste your information in and it appears in your list. And that's all we are really trying to do here as well. For the destination setup for streaming audit events, we wanted to take in a single input and just be able to say, yeah, you are sending data to this place and you can destroy those connections if you want to. So I'm like, yeah, this is ready to go. And this is where it all gets fun. So I'm like, yep, I thought we had a Vue component. So let's see how this goes. Well, first hiccup I ran into, I had not updated some of my Figma links. Some of them were pointing towards some of my like exploration that I went through with Libor and ecosystem as we're thinking through like webhooks. Some of the like demos we did with a few customers to kind of talk about the setup and the configuration. I really wanted to point them here, which would have given them a better idea of how I expected the component to, man, my trackpad's kind of hard to manage right now, to kind of react in different scenarios, but I hadn't updated the link. So that came back and bit me in the butt, which led to some back and forth in this thread to try and clarify, oh, well, I updated icons in the library and for some reason I replaced it with a share icon. So the close icon being there, and you know, there's redlining, lots of conversation going back and forth. And this is where normally with my engineering team, I haven't had to like fill in these gaps because there's somewhat of like a unspoken understanding of what the design intent is and like where we're drawing inspiration from, and it just magically happens. Kind of like when I'll try and keep my sports analogies to a minimum. Like when a quarterback throws a pass, before the wide receiver is even looking. They know on that route where to catch it. And so inevitably, more questions come up, ones that weren't even necessarily design related, but they're constraints in our application. What happens when this feature's at the group level? What happens when this feature's at the project level? What happens when it's in the admin area? We hadn't defined every single state because normally with my engineering team, they know all the constraints that we already work within. And so we customize the display of the feature depending on the role, depending on the level of the application. So I had to then work with Sasha to go kind of back and forth on helping like clarify certain things with the G2 team, just to make sure that we were all on the same page, moving in the right direction. And at this point, a lot of this discussion's happening in the issue because a merge request hadn't opened yet. But we're just kind of sussing out some questions that maybe I wouldn't have necessarily addressed because my engineering team maybe already would have known like what we were trying to do here. And so now let's move over to the merge request itself. So this is all just issue discussion, deciding what to keep, what not, just trying to really lean out everything. So Sasha and I are just going back and forth, trying to help review this change. And I was noticing some weird discrepancies between like how I would see the related issues component play out in an issue versus like how this feature was showing up in audit events, which kind of felt odd to me, but I was like, oh, maybe they just like added some odd CSS to it or something. They had some ideas about like what the loading state would be and how items on the page would render over time. So we're kind of trying to talk through those different scenarios. And ultimately what it boiled down to is I was trying to ask them directly, hey, are we using the view component? I don't fully understand how these get implemented. Something that I've learned just from experience over time is it might start out in view, but then at some point it has to convert over to a shareable component. And then after that, it has to be built into our GitLab UI. So there's a life cycle for things that live in view. And I've learned that I'm not always right in my assumptions here. So Jeremy here from the GU team was really kind in letting me know like, hey, I see that component, but we can't actually use it for XYZ. And I just wanted to double check. So I did DM one of our front-end engineers in our Slack channel just to be like, hey, can you help me better understand why we can't just reuse this issues related component? Because ideally to me, like if we had a single source of truth for a component, then we don't have to update all the variants of it all over the product. They would be able to live in harmony and reduce our code base maintenance. But hearing Rob's thoughts here, who I really trust, it did need to kind of start out separate, and like maybe we can move to a point where we can create a shared component and then replace them in these two different places. But in this merge request, it just wasn't feasible, and that was a poor assumption on my part. So from there, I just, we had more redlining and kind of more like nitpick, just trying to clean things up, like finding odd levels of spacing, certain things appearing in the wrong place. And then this is kind of like where we then started to engage tech writing, because we had discovered, at least I had discovered, I hadn't fully synthesized on a single decision point. Bear in mind, this issue was in like solution validation when the G2 team was like, hey, can we pick this up? And we were like, yeah, sure. But maybe it wasn't really ready for planning breakdown. So maybe we should have said no. But I think that's the struggle, what we might be facing one day with 1,000 contributors, is people might want to get to issues before we've fully vetted them. And so, Evan's amazing. He came through with some really great suggestions. I won't go through all those threads, but there are like maybe 6 or 7 different threads where Evan helped coach a good UI text, good documentation practices here. Which then I'm still trying to test every edge case I can find, still finding odd quirks in spacing, even using the empty state region. I was like, oh, this is so weird. Like, it doesn't look like this in Storybook. And then I kind of find out that there are just some weird quirks about the cascading styles that end up getting inherited, and it can become quite a spaghetti mess to try and clean things up. And from there, we then ran into role issues. Like one thing that my team understands pretty well is which user role has access to the specific feature at different levels, because we want to try and limit the amount of exposure to very sensitive data. And so they're asking questions that maybe my backend team would know, but they did not, just coming in blind to it. All that to say, I'm pretty happy with the feature that we ended up coming out with. It's it's exactly what I intended for it to be. I'm just going to make up a destination endpoint here. It's not going to actually send anything, but it wasn't meant to be super intricate. I was just trying to come up with what was the smallest thing that could at least allow a user to not require to use our API and just do something in GitLab. And I came to learn that I have a lot to learn around helping contributors get ready to contribute to GitLab. So I would say if I could pass along anything, I need better issue refinement skills. I need to be more knowledgeable on Vue components. I gotta be better about keeping my Figma file like neat, better housekeeping there. And the thing that I didn't also expect was budgeting in capacity or carving out time to say no to the stuff that was already on my plate so that I could focus on this contribution. Because instead I tried to squeeze everything in, like just, oh, I'm gonna keep all my promises. And that just became really overwhelming. So that's been my journey with just a contributor coming from the GHU team. But as I imagine us moving towards 1,000 contributions, yeah, I sweat a little to think like, what if I had 10 merge requests all like this coming in at me at once for one milestone? How would I even budget in my other work? I'm not sure, but I certainly can see a few areas that I could improve. So that's all I got for you. I can open the floor. I think I have a few minutes for questions. Christy, it looks like you have the first comment. If you'd like to share your thought.
Yeah, sure. I had gotten used to not talking in this one today, so I wandered off mentally. Yeah, so the goal of 1,000 contributors per month has been keeping me awake at night too. So I'm so pleased and impressed to hear that you have made the same connection. We already have a pretty strong increase in the number of contributors just even today. But I mean, we're looking at almost tenfold as the goal. And it is going to change the way that we work. So thank you for thinking about it now. I love that you're bringing up the challenges that you experience, because I think this is the only way as we start to do it and we start to do more of it, we're going to start to see where these challenges hit us. And then we can respond appropriately with either process changes or suggestions about how we might be doing things differently. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that commentary. It's very nice of you. Dan, did you want to ask your question?
Sure. Thanks for sharing this, Austin. It was great to hear your introspection and your retrospection as well. You listed a bunch of things that you wanted to improve or identified that you felt you could improve. Which one do you think, if you had to pick one, which would it be?
Yeah, I guess the one that I can cheat by saying would be the most impactful is better issue refinement, because it does kind of encapsulate all the other niche areas of my knowledge gaps that I should improve. But ultimately, I think what would be ideal to me is any community contributor, or really anybody at GitLab even, could find an issue and then know how to carry it forward from there. I suspect there are a lot of issues in our validation track that aren't ready. That's why we have a label that's like ready for development or ready for like a planning breakdown. So I think I could probably increase my skills to be able to better contribute to issue refinement, maybe even asking questions earlier to engineers around like the feasibility of my idea. If I just maybe asked more directly at the beginning if we were going to be able to use this related issuable component, I would have gotten a no, and that could have maybe changed my path of direction here, but I didn't ask that early enough. So issue refinement.
That's great, thanks. I'll ask a follow-up in the doc and leave room for someone else to ask a question.
Sure. Pedro, you're writing a novel, my friend. Do you want to just ask the question?
Yeah. Overall, you can read what I wrote, but it just takes much more effort to nurture and support our community contributors compared to you know, our roadmap, milestone, we know what we're going to do. We know who we work with. We know our margin, you know, where the space is. And okay, if we don't do this right this time, we have that other chance, or we can split this down. And with community contributions, it's not like that. And it's tricky. And sometimes you know, you investigate something that is there for years and you have a lot of comments there and people requesting something, and then you investigate and you actually realize that, okay, we've pivoted and we're not going to solve that. It's not worth solving that, or it's not aligned with our vision for this particular feature or area. So overall, it's a tricky issue. I think that we will be ever more forced to confront ourselves with this situation, and that we will need to improve our skills and make more time for these contributions. Thanks for making this visible with this example.
Yeah, absolutely. I was happy to share. Hey, Anna, I think I've taken my 15-minute block, so I'll answer the other questions async.
Thank you, Austin. I'll stop the recording now.